Hey guys, so in this video we are going to talk about estimations. Yes, let's talk about estimations. Why do I want to talk about estimations? Well, I want to talk to you about estimations because I have figured something out. And it's my own trick. I'm sure that no one in the history of mankind has ever been this clever. Maybe they have, I don't know. I'd like to think that I was the first, but odds are that I'm not. Anywho, I felt very happy the other day because I realized that an experiment or a hypothesis of mine actually worked out very well. I had a social experiment, and to make this make any type of sense to you, I have to give you a little bit of context. I know I do that a lot, but just bear with me because it's going to make the whole thing more understandable. So, at my job, we have what we call estimation meetings, and you are most likely going to have that as well if you start working for a company of any type of size. And an estimation meeting is basically just a meeting where you sit down and you talk about the work that you're going to do for the foreseeable future. It can be a month, it can be a few weeks, it depends on the company, but usually you have what we call stories, work tasks that you need to achieve in a certain time period. Now, these have usually been prepped for you by your business colleagues, people, your boss basically, so that you kind of have some prep work so you know what you're going to build, right? And then you and your colleagues are supposed to sit down virtually and estimate how much time each task is going to take. Now this is an agile or a scrum thing, which is a work methodology that is very popular these days. And you can play something. We are doing this at least. We are playing something called planning poker. And planning poker is basically you have a bunch of cards and you set a number that represent how much work you estimate a given story to represent. There are very many flavors to this, but we do actually have cards. Anywho, so we've been doing this for a while, right? And it's been working out fine. This is not the first company where I've been doing this. The one thing that I've noticed though, which I think it's very funny, because I realized I've been doing this for years, I've realized that even though you all put the same number forward saying that we estimate this feature to take this amount of time, usually the measurement is actually still fairly inaccurate. The estimation is still fairly inaccurate. And I started asking myself why that is. And I made a hypothesis. And my theory, if you will, was that I think that when you set your number and I set my number, even if we talk about it, if my number is not your number, because that's the idea of planning poker, you talk about it until you have the same number and you say, yeah, I think that you're right, this is going to take this amount of time. Because we're talking about it, we're just discussing backwards and forwards about things, even when we reach the same number, the steps that I have in my head are very often different from the steps that you have in your head. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that even after, every single time, even after the planning poker is finished, we usually have a technical discussions between us colleagues, or the engineers, and we start getting down to actually speaking about the details, because what we usually try to avoid is to bore our business colleagues with technical details, because although binary searches and hash maps and array lists and all that stuff is so interesting, for some reason business people don't really agree on this. They seem to start fiddling around with their phones whenever I bring up that, hey, we might need to consider the load issue here, because having a buffer is going to be inefficient. You need to use a stream. Usually they kind of zone out there. It's very similar to what I do with my girlfriend when she starts talking about shoes. Anywho, basically, what happens is that even after we have decided that, hey, we have the same number, we still talk about the actual implementation details. And usually by that time, the meeting is already over, all the estimations are set, but our understanding of the problem has changed. So I thought, what happens if I just try to out loud before we make the estimation, or when we are ready to estimate, I will simply try to say with regular words the pseudocode or the steps for what I would do in order to implement this feature. I can give you an example. So we were sitting down just the other day, we were talking about adding a new feature for different types of, basically a rating system. And we talked back and forth, we saw the designs, and we understood fairly well what the scope of the situation was. And so I said, okay, given that what we've been shown now is all true, I would say that the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to open up an endpoint, which is going to take a post request, most likely for putting a rating. And then I will create a model for a rating that I will give a user ID and an associated entity ID for the thing that you are rating. And then I will create a collection in our database for that. I'm probably going to put up a service that is called something like notification service of some sort, add some unit tests for that, and maybe 1 or 2 integration tests for the new endpoint. Once that is done, I'm going to have to also, of course, declare a model for all of this, which is going to require us to be in a meeting, because I want to make sure that you know that what model we're going to make here, so that when you start working, you know what the data structure is going to be. And when I've done that, I will also have a look at updating the model because the view that we are seeing here, the subscription, or sorry, the notification information is going to be shown on this view here. That probably has a view model of some sort that needs to be updated. So we need to update those methods, update those unit tests that are associated with this view. So that's roughly, I think, the steps that are required. And when I said that, I was not surprised, because this was exactly what I suspected. One of my colleagues just kind of went, well, Fredrik, that sounds all well and good, but are you thinking about whether or not we're going to use the event sourcing system that we are using? Do we want to have the same approach here? Because maybe we're going to have an issue with the amount of data that we are generating. That's what I wanted. Not that specific question, but I wanted to see if, by saying out loud what I think are the steps needed in order to execute this feature or to complete it, I wanted to see if my colleagues agreed, because the steps that I suspected that the way that they think about this is very different from my way of thinking about it. And so we started talking, and we discussed, questions were asked and answered, and then I did it again. I simply said, okay, so now that we've talked about it, I'm going to open up another endpoint, and just went through the whole thing again, the steps that I had in my head for doing this. The second time, another question popped up, and my colleague said, well, what about this situation? And so we talked about it again. The third time, I did the same thing. I simply said, okay, I'm going to open up an endpoint, going to declare a service, write some integration, yada, yada, yada. I repeated everything that I was going to do in order to solve this problem. And that time, nobody said anything. They said, yeah, that seems to be exactly what we should be doing here. And then we estimated. And I can tell you, the execution so far has been flawless. So this is what I want you to take away from this. Try it out next time that you and your colleagues are talking about what feature you're going to implement. Try to just, in plain English, explain the steps that you are going to take in order to do this. Because you will find that by just saying it out loud, you give people an opportunity to hear your thoughts and to synchronize with you, and you can synchronize with them. And now you have a common understanding of the steps that are required. You're still going to have to talk about it even more, most likely, but at the very least, your estimation is going to be more accurate, because now you all know the steps that you need to take in order to finish the feature. Have a great day.